Driving buses isn't what most people would call exciting, but it suits me just fine. I don't need excitement. A job is a job, and as long as the hours are steady and the pay's enough to keep the lights on, that's good enough for me. I've been doing the night shift for years now. The streets are quiet, most of the regular passengers know me, and by the end of my shift, I can usually catch the early morning news before heading to bed. But there's always been this one rule hanging over my head: never pick up anyone from the old train station after midnight. It was an unspoken rule, a tradition passed down from driver to driver, like a torch nobody really wanted to hold. I never thought much of it. The station's been closed longer than I've been alive, and if I'm honest, it always gave me the creeps, even during the day. It's one of those places that just feels wrong. Maybe it's the isolation of its location, or maybe it's the stories that people in my town always whisper about. And every night, it's on my route. I have to pass it. I've never by it, though. But there I was, on a dark, rainy night, driving my usual late route, when I saw her. The bus was nearly empty, just a couple of tired workers in the back, dozing off. The rain had started to pick up, pelting the windshield so hard that even the wipers couldn't keep up. I kept my eyes on the road, hands firmly on the wheel, barely noticing as the old train station came into view. Then I saw her, a woman, standing alone under the flickering street lamp on the outside of the train station. She was drenched, her clothes soaked and clinging to her frame. Her head was down, hair plastered to her face, and she was waving weakly, trying to flag me down. I checked the clock. It was 11:58 p.m. I hesitated, my foot hovering over the brake. I could hear the rule in my head, as clear as if someone was sitting beside me, whispering it: never pick up anyone from the old train station after midnight. But technically, it wasn't midnight yet. And she looked desperate. I couldn't just leave her out there in the rain, could I? Against my better judgment, I slowed the bus and pulled over. The door opened with a hiss, and she climbed on board without a word. Her wet shoes squeaked against the floor as she shuffled to a seat near the front, 3 rows behind me. I glanced at her through the rearview mirror. She was hunched over, hair hanging in wet strands over her face, water dripping onto the seat. She didn't say a thing. I wanted to ask where she was going, but something in the pit of my stomach told me not to. Instead, I shifted the bus into gear and continued down the road. As I did this, my eye caught the clock. It was 12:01 a.m. after midnight. At first, everything seemed normal enough. The bus rumbled along the wet streets, the familiar sound of the engine filling the silence. The few passengers I had left were dozing off, the lights overhead casting a dim glow on their faces. I kept my eyes on the road, but every so often I'd glance in the rearview mirror. The woman hadn't moved. She sat as still as a statue, her face still hidden behind that curtain of wet hair. A few more minutes passed, maybe 5 or 10, I wasn't sure. The rain had let up, leaving the road slick and shining under the streetlights. I should have been nearing the end of my route by now, but something was wrong. The streets didn't look familiar anymore. The buildings I passed every night, the corner store, the gas station, the diner that stayed open late, they were all gone, replaced by dark, crumbling structures I didn't recognize. I slowed the bus, peering out the window. Had I unknowingly taken a wrong turn? No, that wasn't possible. I'd driven this route 1,000 times. I knew every twist and turn by heart. But now, everything seemed different. The clock on the dashboard blinked. It was 12:20 a.m. I should have been at the final stop by now, letting off the last of the passengers. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror again, my blood ran cold. There were more people on the bus. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the rain on the windows was messing with my vision. But no, there were definitely more passengers. Several more. They were sitting scattered across the seats, all facing forward, perfectly still. I didn't remember picking them up. I hadn't opened the doors since the woman at the old train station got on. But there they were, silent, motionless, and somehow wrong. Their faces were blurred, like smudged out of focus. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, but it didn't help. The harder I tried to focus on them, the less I could see. Their clothes were outdated, like something from decades ago. Some wore suits and ties, others long dresses, but none of it seemed real. They looked more like shadows of people, faded impressions of what they used to be. I swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The air in the bus felt heavier, colder, and the soft hum of the engine had become an eerie sound. "Is everything all right back there?" I called out, my voice breaking the stillness. No answer. Not a word. Not a sound. The woman, the one I'd picked up, still hadn't moved. She just sat there, her head tilted slightly to the side like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the road ahead, trying to focus. I just needed to get through the route. I'd drop everyone off, and everything would be fine. It had to be. But the road was changing too. Trees now lined the streets, their branches arching over the bus, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to stretch out, reaching for the vehicle as we passed. The streetlights flickered, casting everything in and out of darkness. My breath quickened, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. Something wasn't right. I could feel it, deep in my bones. Something was terribly wrong. I checked the clock again. It was now 12:50 a.m. Time was moving, but I wasn't getting anywhere. The bus wasn't following the route anymore. Every turn I took seemed to lead me further away, deeper into some dark, foggy maze that had no end. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, my hands trembling. The passengers were still there. But they were different now. They weren't just sitting anymore. They were all standing, their heads tilted at strange angles, watching me. I could feel their eyes, or whatever they had instead of eyes, boring into the back of my skull. Panic bubbled up in my chest, and I slammed my foot on the brake. The bus screeched to a stop, throwing me forward against the steering wheel. The passengers didn't move. They stayed perfectly still, their hollow gazes locked on me. I glanced at the woman again, my heart pounding in my ears. She was the only one who wasn't standing. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. "Hey!" I called out, my voice shaky. "Are you all right?" She didn't respond. I swallowed hard and slowly got out of my seat, my legs shaking as I made my way down the narrow aisle. The other passengers, if you could even call them that, watched me silently as I approached the woman. "Miss," I said, reaching out to tap her shoulder. As soon as my fingers brushed the damp fabric of her coat, she jerked up upright, her head snapping around to face me. Her face. God, her face. It wasn't human. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to swallow the dim light of the bus. Her mouth stretched into a wide, unnatural grin, revealing sharp, two white teeth. "You shouldn't have stopped," she whispered, her voice low and distorted, like it was coming from somewhere far away. I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribs. She stood up, her wet clothes clinging to her thin frame, and began walking toward me, her footsteps echoing in the silence. I turned and ran back to the driver's seat, fumbling with the controls as I tried to restart the bus. The engine sputtered to life, and I slammed my foot on the gas. The bus lurched forward, the fog outside thickening as the road stretched out endlessly before me. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just had to get away from them, from her. But no matter how fast I drove, the passengers stayed with me. They were all still standing. Then they moved closer, surrounding me. The woman's voice echoed in my head. "You broke the rule, Tom. Now you're one of us." I screamed, "No." The bus sped forward. I don't know how, but when I glanced at the clock, and it read 3 a.m., I grabbed the radio, my hands trembling. "Dispatch, come in," I said, my voice barely a whisper. No answer. Only static. As the passengers closed in, the last thing I heard was the sound of the woman's laughter, deafening and echoing through the bus. And then there was nothing. The next morning when the day shift driver came in, they found my bus parked neatly at the depot, the engine still running. But I wasn't there. Neither were the passengers. They never found me, or anyone who was on that bus that night. The only thing they found was the route sheet, with one final stop circled in red. It read, "Old Train Station